You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. My name is Brady, joined in sunny studio by Billy Galenko.
Greetings.
Billy, how are you doing?
Very well, very well. It's another exciting week, another exciting interview coming up as well.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. We'll introduce Carlin here down the line, but it's awesome to be able to talk to someone who is running 4 different wine programs for a really successful hospitality group, and Bobby Stuckey's director of wine. So we'll introduce Carlin later on, but I want to hear what you've been drinking this weekend.
Oh, I was just trying to remember all of these things ahead of our podcast, and one of them actually I had forgotten about. I had opened a little while back. I'm trying to remember the vintage. I think it was 2016, 2017. We had a Monte Rosso Bedrock Zinfandel recently, which was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And if for those who don't know, like Bedrock number 1 focuses as a company on kind of these older vine vineyards in general, and Monte Rosso is one of actually the oldest ones in Sonoma in terms of Zinfandel. I think their vines were over 120 years old for sure. I'm trying to remember. I don't want to over exaggerate, but they were well over 100 years, which is pretty cool. I had a little bit, and I was actually able to share it with a couple buddies who came by later, and it was cool because one guy is a certified sommelier, had worked in top restaurants in New York. The other guy is a good friend of his who he just kind of like tastes along with us, and he has a really good palate, but he's like uninitiated and describes things in a way. And we had a couple of red wines, and he could really tell like there was a different depth and like texture, and he was using normal words, and I was like, that's exactly right. Like he could actually tell the old wine versus not, which was pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, that is cool. We talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about old vines on the episode that we recorded today that will come out in a couple of weeks too. And so we should do more content on old vines, especially in California, as old isn't super old, but is really unique to have.
Yeah. No, that'll be well, now we just did it live on air. Maybe that'll be one of our topics for our upcoming. Now, once a month, we do a session where it's just Brady and I talking, and we can talk about some regions that are known for their old vines, and maybe talk about some wines that we've had that are old vine. Because my time in Australia, and there's a bunch, and I know you're even in your Santorini trip, which we'll always talk about forever.
That's right.
Had some really old vines as well. So, stay tuned for more old vine chat. Otherwise, speaking of Greece, I had a really good Retsina last weekend. For those who don't know, again, Retsina is one of these wines that was traditionally made with pine resin, and potentially also aged in cedar oak chests, or cedar, not oak, obviously cedar wood chests or barrels. Normally the ones I've had tend to be more like
really bad.
I've heard the stereotype, and I know they give tourists really bad stuff when they go to Greece. So I've been trying to seek out at nicer wine places, but the ones I've had have been more viscous. They've been like thicker dessert ones. This one I had last weekend, I think the ABV was up there, but it was actually light and fresh, and like kind of it was very acid driven, and I was surprised. They only gave me a 3-ounce pour, so I think the ABV was higher, but it had like a touch more of like the amount of like juniper or cedar you would get in like a gin and tonic, kind of more than like heavy Retsina. So I was flabbergasted. So good ones do exist. I've been on the search for years, and I've had over 5 now, which is not a ton, but I mean, like I've kept going, and everyone's been relatively similar until this. So that was exciting. Big day.
The fact that a place exists near you that you can even buy that, poured by the glass is crazy. It just doesn't exist.
Well, anytime
anywhere else.
Anytime I see anything like that poured by the glass, I always get it just to encourage them to keep pouring more weird stuff by the glass.
Sure, yeah.
Like just keep going.
But you're drinking pine resin wine, and I was just telling you before we started recording that I'm ready for fall so that I can drink red wines above 14% again, because I don't know why I have I'll get out of that really quickly. Once we get into the fall, I'll be like, I'm tired of this. is too much. But yeah, I feel like I can't drink Pinot Noir or Cab or Merlot or Zen in the summertime. It's just
Got
my
to drink
body
some sparkling
rejects it.
reds. I cracked
Yeah, that's true.
some Lambrusco last weekend. The Sobrara was how you would enunciate it, but Sobrara, that's like the lightest style. So that was fun. You can drink Lambrusco all year round. You can put the heavier ones in the winter. These now. So I also have a sparkling Barbera that I will maybe open this weekend. So that'll be, you can get the best of both red and sparkling.
I think Cab Franc you can drink in the summertime, especially Virginia Cab Franc.
Well, those are Cab Francs tend to be really good chilled as well. Especially my mind goes to the Loire Valley. Yours goes to Virginia. That's cool. Whatever floats your boat. But yeah, so let's dive in a little bit about our guest for today. She like you mentioned, she's a wine director, and you can kind of talk about more of what I guess all of the programs she works kind of handles under Bobby Stuckey. But what I guess here, do you want to do the intro and then I'll kind of like elaborate on what I found most interesting?
Sure. Yeah. So our interview today is with Carlin Karr. Carlin's the wine director at Frasca Hospitality Group, which is we had Bobby Stuckey on a few podcast episodes back, who's his main focus. I mean, the focus of the entire group is around hospitality, really high level focus on the experience of the diner, which obviously every restaurant has that, but I think that they ratchet up a couple of notches, take it to a different level. A lot of their food and wine is Italian inspired in different ways, different regions. We talked about Friuli. I know that they have, I believe the pizzeria maybe is like a Tuscan style place. Don't quote me on that. We actually might talk about it in this episode. I can't quite recall. But Carlin is the wine director for several of their properties, actually all of their properties, including Tavernetta in Denver, Sunday Vinyl, which is a wine bar in Denver, which Billy and I have visited, Pizzeria Locale, and Frasca Food and Wine, which is their flagship special occasion restaurant. And so, yeah, it was really great to talk with Carlin because she is consummate professional in that she adores wine from everywhere in the world. She's extremely passionate about the guest experience, likes to be hands-on with the other somms on the floor at her restaurants and in teaching and training. But she's also heavily involved with building a wine list that is representative of wines internationally and really broad, and also thinking about the future in building a cellar for the group that hopefully will carry them forward for 10, 15, 25 years.
Yeah, no, she's really, the conversation was great. It brought me back to when I was first starting to study wine and what I heard about somms. Like, she's truly like a somm. Like before it was cool to be a somm, she worked her way up from doing like the little things in the kitchen and helping around the restaurant, and worked her way up through service and became a somm that way. So she really learned the nuts and bolts. For anybody who's like, I guess has been drinking wine for a long time and really appreciated, back in the day when the wine director used to know their list by heart, and they had like carefully crafted it over many years. That's kind of the ethos that she brings, and kind of the point of, I guess, specificity and level of detail they're working on here, which is really cool. You don't see that as much these days, especially as like wine became really popular and being a somm became popular. It's like now basically they'll throw, especially after the pandemic, and she gets really into this, they'll basically throw people with limited experience up there, because now maybe after the pandemic restaurants are carrying less inventory, and they're trying to basically be more lean. There's no need to basically know your many $1 million, well, I don't know if hers are $1 million, but your extensive cellar where you're buying wine to actually age in order to give people wines at a good price. You only have to know 10 wines that you bought recently, and that's it. That's something. And then the amount she tastes, she just talks about how much she's tasting regularly, and she's only picking certain qualities. It's really the old school mentality of trying to bring true value and quality to the drinkers at the table.
Yeah, I think we've interviewed a fair amount of somms now, and I think you'd be really hard pressed to find someone who is more dedicated to, like you said, the tradition of that role and that position and what it holds in a restaurant, and just dedicated to wine in general, and good wine. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, really, really happy to have Carlin on today. She, as Billy said, is a som, and I think our listeners will enjoy hearing her perspective on purchasing for the future, on satisfying the guest experience and exceeding those expectations. So enjoy our interview with Carlin Karr. Hey, Carlin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we recently had, obviously, Bobby on, Bobby Stuckey, and our listeners, I think, really responded well to that episode. And Bobby had mentioned on there that we have to talk to his wine director. And so, yeah, we got in touch and had some good conversation. And yeah, excited to have you on today.
Yeah, super excited to be here.
Well, I'm hoping that you can give just a brief background of how you came to your position with Frasca, and maybe talk a little bit about Frasca. But I know that you started up Sons and Daughters, a restaurant out in San Francisco. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had been in San Francisco for a few years, and that was actually the first restaurant I worked at, and I was part of the opening team as the general manager and wine director, and that's where I met Bobby. All of my mentors in San Francisco always told me that in terms of mentorship and great wine restaurants, that Bobby was the best and Frasca was the best, and so it was always kind of in the back of my mind. I went to school at CU in Boulder, but I never thought that I would move back until kind of this ongoing conversation of Frasca was really happening, and then I had the opportunity to meet Bobby. He was selling Scarpetta in the market in San Francisco, and came to Sons and Daughters, and we really hit it off. And shortly after that, they were in a rare moment at Frasca when they were in need of a floor sommelier, and I jumped at the opportunity. So I moved back to Boulder in 2012 and filled that sommelier position, and I've been here since.
So when you think about the culture at Frasca, what's that kind of one thing that every night the team knows we have to get this right, and there's no excuse, there could never be an excuse why we get this wrong? Like, what's that one thing that's held up kind of prominent above everything else?
Yeah, I'd say at all of our restaurants, the one thing that matters the most and that there's no excuse for, that Bobby cares the most about, is providing great hospitality. And if a table seems like they're not enjoying something, if they're going downhill, or if they're not liking something, we can always turn it around, is our philosophy, and we can always win them back over. And so that not doing that, or not attempting that, or not getting management involved, not getting sommeliers involved, not getting, if Bobby's there, not having him involved, is a failure. So we believe that we can always make it right in the moment with a guest if they're not enjoying their experience, rather than having them leave and have had a negative experience.
Yeah.
What is an example of that? Is somebody just like, I don't like this food, or is their wine quirked, or is it something you guys don't even do and it turns out they're like, it's their problem, but you still have to be nice?
Well, Bobby's example always could be because we're at Frasca, we're 40 minutes outside of Denver, and if they're coming from South Denver and they go through traffic and they come in kind of angry, and they're not, but it has nothing to do with what we did, but we already have to win them over extra because they're in a bad mood. No one likes sitting in traffic, and they have to drive back home, and so we're already in an uphill battle. And being a special occasion restaurant and being so expensive, expectations are so high. And so if they have one disappointing thing, if we maybe take the wrong glass of wine, or if they don't love a dish, making sure we get them a different dish right away, and of course comping it, addressing it, acknowledging it, is really important. And And then any kind of other touches and layers that we can add to the experience that the guest isn't expecting is really important to us also.
Yeah, in my role here, deal a lot directly with investors and have had like, one-to-one kind of specialty sales experience in the past. And the thing that I always really liked about those kinds of roles is exactly what you mentioned, that kind of taking something that is not good and having the opportunity to turn it around. And for me, that's always feels more rewarding when you can take someone from, they're in a really bad place to you blew their mind and their expectations. That's really awesome. That's cool to have a culture that can do that consistently.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so outside of just sort of the philosophy and mission of Frasca, when you came on, what was the state of the wine program? I'm sure there were awesome wines on the list, but what was going on at that time? This was what, 8, 9 years ago? How long?
It
Is
was
that about
11 years ago.
11? Okay.
Yeah, I would say that it was, Frasca was a well-known, really like kind of already legendary wine program. But definitely over the last 11 years, it's definitely blown up in terms of size and inventory. I maybe have a spending problem, but Bobby encourages it. And so we've just expanded the wine list big time and really expanded like our cellar, our things that are not on the wine list, but that we're kind of building a back stock of wine to age and then put on the wine list later. So that's like
Yeah.
been my overall impact, and really expanding Nebbiolo and Sangiovese, white Burgundy,
Hmm.
just going deeper on everything, deeper on Burgundy in general. Um, and, wine regions like Etna, for example, kind of weren't really a thing in terms
Hmm.
of the scale that they are now. And so those have just been a natural evolution of expansion.
How unique is it, and how special does it feel to be at a place where you have the ability to one buy wine, sounds like in such volume and with such breadth, but also to have a back stock and to hold back wine because I don't maybe not many diners think about it, but it's very rare for a restaurant to have a substantial cellar for aging, right? And
Yeah.
so what's can you just talk about like how unique that is? What kind of opportunities does that afford?
It's a huge privilege. It's a big responsibility, but it's really fun. I mean, I think of things like every year we have white truffle and Barolo dinner, and so that is something I'm always thinking about. I buy really large drops of Nebbiolo with that dinner in mind specifically. We do 3 nights, and so I need like 48 bottles of every wine that we pour for that dinner. And so I'm
Hmm.
always thinking like, 8 years, 10 years out when I'm buying Nebbiolo just for the truffle dinner. And then I also have
Wow.
to think about just for the wine list also, but we have to like sequester truffle dinner wines on their own. So that's just like one thing. And then Burgundy, it's like, it's kind of awesome that we have a lot of Burgundy by the case that now we only get a few bottles of allocated to us. And so buying in a kind of aggressive manner felt really kind of garish in the moment, but now it's really awesome to have a backstock, especially with all these short vintages of the classic wine regions of the world.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I don't think people think about the value that you're able to provide them as well. With if you were to acquire these back vintage wines on the secondary market now, you would be paying an arm and a leg and then having to mark that up. But you're able to kind of
Yeah.
pass a little bit of that on to the consumer because you've done the expensive part of just aging the wine on your
Yeah.
own.
Yeah, and we generally price the wines at what we paid for more or less, with the exception of like when we have big verticals, it always looks a little weird when the current release is way more expensive, but there's so much value there. And especially like Barolo, it's so inexpensive. 10 years ago, it was like it maxed out at $50 a bottle wholesale. Nothing was more than that. So there's so much value there.
What do you think we're going to be saying the same thing about in 10 years? Do you think something like some of like the Cornelius and Etnas or stuff like that, will we be commenting the same way? Or like, where do you think we'll be?
I think there's a lot of Etna producers that are like making serious wines that are highly ageable. But I think also like Sangiovese, I think Sangiovese has been overlooked by a lot of people for a long time. And I think there's so much value there also, but they're serious wines. Chianti Classico in particular, I think, everyone loves Pergola Torte and collects it and trades it. And, on the secondary market, it's so expensive, but there's other wines from like across the street from Pergola Torte that are equally, if not more compelling, in my opinion, and cost way less. So I think that there's a lot there. But also, I think Etna's a obvious, really exciting wine region.
I'll let Brady hop in, but do you think that Chianti Classico, just because of the stigma of the name Chianti and everybody thinking of it as a cheaper bulk thing, has kind of lost a little bit of shine with like mainstream consumers compared to like a Brunello or like Super Tuscans, and now it's kind of like regaining some of its stature?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's gone wrong in the history of Chianti Classico that has really done damage to the region and the brand of Chianti Classico. In general, I think that a lot of the wines have been really underpriced for a long time, and it hasn't really served the wine region as a whole. But I think that the worst problem of Chianti Classico over the last, 50 years has been the uh, lack of restrictions on cepage. So the fact that international varieties have been so widespread and used in the blend has made it really hard to define terroir and typicity for the region, and it's made it less compelling from a wine nerd or sommelier perspective, versus like Montalcino and just the great wine regions of the world. It's not about a single grape in a single place and the hand of the winemaker. I think that that is what makes all great wines seriously compelling. And having international varieties as part of the blend really harmed Chianti Classico. They're finally getting away from that with the UGA system. And, Gran Selezione now does not allow international varieties moving forward, which is like a huge win for the region. So now it's all about Sangiovese. But that, I think, personally, is why Chianti Classico really hasn't caught on with so many people. I think it's just not like, you can't compare wines from producers and site.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Does that, in terms of the short term, as like I assume, will there be more Sangiovese even coming online locally in vineyards there? And does that affect the short term production, or how were those other varieties coming in?
Yeah, basically because of this change in wine law right now in Chianti Classico, everyone's ripping out their Bordeaux
Yeah.
varieties, which I think is like godsend. I'm so happy about it. I I love Sassicaia. I love Ornellaia, but that's like a totally different wine from a totally different place. And
Mm-hmm.
those, it's not, Chianti Classico should be about Sangiovese.
Yeah.
So,
So maybe can you share a little bit about what sourcing for on-premise like restaurant sales is like? What's kind of the are you tasting wine every week and buying every week? Does this happen kind of in quarter by quarter, or yeah, sort of what's the cycle of how you buy for the restaurant, and I guess across your restaurants?
yeah, so I'm the wine buyer for 4 restaurants. And so, and we have 10 sommeliers that I lead. But I taste wine all the time. I tasted wine this morning with suppliers, and I will taste wine this afternoon. I am always buying and always tasting. I am definitely of the philosophy that more is more, and you get your palate can always be better, and I like to always be tasting. And I also like for my wine team to also always be tasting, and so they're always present as much as possible in tastings. And I buy wine based on the needs of the restaurant, but as we already talked about, we're always building the cellars, particularly at Frasca and Tavernetta, our Italian focused wine program in Denver. But I basically taste anywhere from 10 wines to 500 wines a week. With I say no to basically
Yeah.
nobody and taste as often as possible. We can't buy gray market wine in our state of Colorado, so I buy only from suppliers through distributors and importers in Colorado.
Yeah, that's interesting. Does that what sorts of challenges does that structure pose that are maybe unique to, I don't know, maybe a restaurant in San Francisco, LA, or New York, or on one of the coasts or something? Yeah.
It makes it difficult to build a list that is deep in age. You can't, and the rarities. It's hard to have like a lot of Bartolo Mascarello, Rinaldi, stuff like that. You only can get through the supplier of those wines. What that means is that I have to be great at forming great relationships with all suppliers, and you have to play the game. You have to buy everything that you have to buy in order to get allocations of everything.
Sure. Yeah. No special favors just because of your restaurant group, huh?
No, unfortunately, that's not the way it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish it was.
You said that a lot of the wines that you're offering on your list are, you try and be, as competitive to what you acquired the wine for your guests as possible. How does the beverage program in general, and I'm sure it kind of probably changes location by location, like concept by concept, depending on the restaurant, but how does your beverage program contribute to the overall profitability of the business and like of each of the restaurants?
It's major.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the overall sales of the
Mm-hmm.
restaurants, and we're a very financially savvy restaurant group, and we look at profit and loss statements every month. We run financials very diligently. We operate on a very diligent budget, and the beverage department is very important. That I also oversee the bar programs, and so the bar programs I think are a little bit more compelling in terms of profitability. You can only charge so much on a bottle of wine before people really notice, and we have a very, I think, very fair markup on our bottle sales. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's that's how the lights stay on.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you're buying, I guess, a lot from traditional channels and distributors, and you're forced to buy some of the, I don't want to say like the lesser wines to get to the the certain highly allocated wines. How do you typically integrate that into a program, knowing like, is it just by the glass only, or do you have like tastings where you can progress people through like the IGT up until like the really special stuff? How do you handle those?
Well, I think it's, I, when writing a wine list or running a program, I operate under the philosophy of having what I call a ladder, and making sure that our ladder on the price on the wine list is really fleshed out so that there's something for everyone. No matter what the restaurant is or the occasion of the restaurant, we want to have a really comfortable price point for everything. So we need to have a bottle of wine at $40 all the way up to like $4,000, and everything in between at every style for every person. We don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable that we don't have like that Napa Cab style, fleshy, full-bodied, rich wine at that $40 price point, but then also like the 150 and whatnot.
allocation game thing, I'm also like not one to lean into it in the way that I will not take wines that are not to my standards. I will not buy wine that is not delicious, sound, well made, great balanced wine that we can all get behind and that the team wants to sell. So if I have to pass on certain wines that I really want because the supplier is like playing a game that I just am not down with, then I will.
Yeah.
And I also think that producers need to know that their wines are being leveraged with like swill if that's the scenario. And I'm not, I've reached out to them in the past to let them know, because it's kind of BS when that's the scenario, if there's like one crown jewel of a book that's being leveraged against like a bunch of liquor products. That's not right. So I just don't do that.
Yeah. That really makes sense.
And so like is typically some of those wines will be put on the list by the glass. And we're not talking about swill. We're talking about just the wines that you can get behind and that you had to acquire before the highly allocated stuff. Is that sort of the like, do you have a pretty extensive by the glass list where you can like flesh that out?
Yeah, I mean, I like the by the glass list to honestly be like what makes most sense with the food at the time that is compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I think I look at a by the glass list the first thing before I look at the menu of every restaurant I go to. I think the by the glass list like says everything about a restaurant. I think it says everything about the wine buyer. I think it says it's like the snapshot of the whole picture to me, because it's like the effort put in by the wine director. It's, do they care or not? The pricing structure, you can tell like if they're like making all the money on by the glass, or if they're like providing value to guests. If there's like really interesting, great wines by the glass that you honestly want to drink and you're like, wow, that's awesome. They have Premier Cruise Chablis at a great price point by the glass, or they have, great, compelling Etna Bianco by the glass. Like, cool. I want to drink that. But if it's all like super obscure and it doesn't like, no one knows what it is, that's also not really providing a whole lot of hospitality to the average guest. If it's like so nerdy, that's more about the wine director than it is about the people dining in the restaurant. And it's also not good to the staff. It's like, then that makes it so hard for servers who have to explain every single thing to every single person. It's like, what is the goal here? So I think that the by the glass list is the ultimate reflection of like what's going on in the restaurant. So I make sure to put a lot of effort into the by the glass list.
I completely agree. I didn't think about if it's too complex that's also bad, because like since we work in wine, I would appreciate that, but I think that's a valuable insight. You might appreciate this. I don't think I told Brady this yet either. I live in Los Angeles, and we were at like it's a wine bar that has both kind of, it's low intervention wines, but they lean, it can be anything from like kind of traditionally made low intervention to full on natty. And they had I ended up getting, so their wines typically range from like 13 to 17 by the glass. But they had, and I'm just looking at it, and I was kind of surprised because they had a Piquette from Northern California that was $17 by the glass. And I'm like still like bothered by the fact that somebody could be re-fermenting grape skins with anything and then charging 17 by the glass. But then they had a Chenin. I wasn't as familiar with the producer, but from South Africa. And it's one of those places where you can taste before you get them. And I tried it, and it was a quality, well-made wine from South Africa. And I was like, I'm going to spend $11 on this because I don't know why that one was $11 rather than a Piquette that's grape skins for 17. I was like, I don't know. It's a place I like, and I was still like, that kind of not ruined my experience, but like I left after the one glass there. I was like, I just can't handle this today.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm with you on Piquette, by the way. Not for me.
$85 a bottle, no good for you guys.
Well, I don't mind Piquettes. I just think like It's like, come on, guys, you were clearly targeting the hipster who's coming in and trying something alternative and making them pay more for this than like you should be promoting this well-made South African wine that the producer probably like worked really hard to do. Instead, it's like the other guys just like, I'll throw these in and make a little extra bucks, which I'm sure they worked hard on their piquette too. But I don't know. That's just a rant that I've had in me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
When we talked on sort of our intro call, we talked about we talked about a ton of wines. I had a notepad where I wrote down all of the different producers, both domestically and internationally, as well as just varieties that you were interested in. We'd love to talk with you about some of what you have been focused mostly on, which it sounds like a little bit of Chianti or Sangiovese, probably from all over the place, right? But you also mentioned Pinot Noir and domestically here, Oregon wines. Billy and I got to travel and taste in Oregon together last year, I believe it was. And so, yeah, we'd love to dive in there. Let's start. What's your, what are maybe the producers or varieties that standing out to you? And we can go domestically and then internationally, or we can go Europe and rest of the world. But yeah, would love to hear some of the things that are on your mind right now.
Yeah, domestically, I mean, I love like the kind of old school classics, which I guess is kind of a very typical thing to say, but but I also love like Zinfandel. I love old school style Zinfandels. I love like Limerick Lane, and I love Ridge, of course. I think Ridge is America's greatest winery for so many reasons.
Yeah.
I've had so many great moments with old Ridge Zinfandel and even like old Ridge Chardonnay, and Montebello is of course so iconic and incredible. And it's such a special place. It's just really amazing. But I also love like Diamond Creek and Dunn. I love Coruscant. I love Dalavala. Those are like my go-to California Cabernets. I love Oregon Pinot Noir. I love, Irie, Cristom. I love Lingua Franca. Antica Terra, I'm a supporter of for sure. And I don't know if you read the recent New York Times article about Antica Terra. Maggie Harrison's just a crazy kind of phenom, and I love her philosophy, and I just think like the wine world needs more avant-garde people like her who are diligent and focused and make great wine. And I also love Walter Scott. I love their Chardonnays. Yeah, it's kind of my Oregon faves.
Yeah.
Nate Reddy also. I mean, he's wild and makes wild wines, but he was the original wine director of Frasca. I don't know if you know that, but
Interesting. Oh, cool.
He used to be disciplined in a different way, and had a different palate than I think it has transitioned to now. But I think his passion is just undeniable, and he's affected so many people around him in terms of farming, and I'm behind him in terms of his ethos.
Yeah.
Like
are these wines that you collect and drink a lot of kind of on your own? And how big are you into kind of buying, storing, drinking wine when you're not in your, work context? Because I know you're drinking a lot of wine at work anyways. Does it, is that something that carries over?
Yeah, so I have like a locker, like an offsite storage facility that I buy wine that I maybe will, like, my thought is like I will sell half, drink half, depending on my return on investment, and that is almost exclusively Burgundy. And then it's like everything from, it's mostly all red Burgundy, like Dujac and Angeville and DRC and stuff like that. And then, so it's like not very exciting to talk about. It's just kind of red Burgundy. But it's an investment. And And then I also just like throw in there, like if I really love something, and I want to age it. So stuff like Northern Rhone Syrah, like Great Northern Rhone Syrah, and like Chateau Simon. I'll buy like a mixed case of
Mm-hmm.
Rouge
Mm-hmm.
Red and Rosé, and like Ovette. Have you had that from the South?
No.
It's super good. It's Kermit Lynch producer, makes really compelling red wines in particular. Um, and then, of course, Italian wine. But like my everyday drinking wine is definitely stuff that I mostly am selling. So it's mostly
Mm-hmm.
Italian wines. Um, and I also drink like a ton of Gruner Veltliner and a ton of Riesling, of course, because I'm a sommelier, and
Of course.
um, Chablis, and like just high acid whites and champagne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who are some of your favorite Gruner producers?
I love I love like I love all styles of Gruner first of all, but I really like heavily extracted Gruner. So I love like Prager and Piekler and Knoll, and I like Peter Fitter Malberg a lot, but that's like a different style for sure. I love for like great value, I love Ingrid Groys in the Weinviertel. Her wines are just awesome and so inexpensive. Um, um,
Yeah, we don't post these episodes. We just use them for recommendations for us.
love that. Yeah, but like Rudy Piekler and Prager, I like. I just love Altsinger. Love.
Mm.
Yeah, I can't get enough. I love it, and I love Gruner because I can honestly love it and drink it all year round.
Yeah,
It's not, to me, it's not like a seasonal
Hmm.
wine. It feels good and feels right to me all year. I love it.
that makes sense. I mean, staying in Austria, there, I even think like some of the Zweigelts and some Blaufränkisch, like lighter expressions, are also almost all season too. Just because of their acid, you could almost have that with like a at a barbecue and not be like overwhelmed. I just love Austrian wine, so I just wanted to
Me
hear
too.
you talk about it a little bit more. Cool.
Yeah, me too. And some of the like Styria Sauvignon Blanc, so great and
Mm-hmm.
really compelling. Yeah, I love like Moritz,
Mm-hmm.
Blaufränkisch. Those wines are serious, and the Cru vineyards of those are really, really good. They're expensive, but really good.
And
Yeah,
now,
they're
I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but Billy, I don't know if Billy you know this, but I sent Carlin some Virginia wines because she said that she had never had Virginia wines before. Did you get a chance to try any of the wines I sent?
I, I haven't yet, but I'm
Oh
really
my
excited
goodness.
to try them. I know I was like, God, I have to do that before, but I just got down to the wire, and
It's okay.
I didn't want to. I want to thoughtfully taste them and have great like
Yeah, you gotta
a good
mix it
moment with
into one of
them.
those weeks. Mix it into one of those weeks where you only taste 10 wines. Give it the amount of attention. Um,
Yeah,
but
totally.
that's cool. All good. Um,
I
where
look forward to it though.
so
Thank you.
yeah, that's all good. Yeah, that's where if we could get a section of Virginia wines on the Frasca list because of our podcast, that would be huge for me. I don't know how huge it would be for Billy, but that would be huge for me.
and I'm the one from Virginia. He's not.
That's right.
But yeah, Brady's secretly paid by the Virginia Wine
Wine
Society if it
Alliance.
exists.
Yeah.
I had
Where
one question.
we
Yeah, hold
go
on,
ahead.
Brady. Well, not hold on. Actually, I don't know why I would say hold on. This is a complete non sequitur. But I've always kind of wondered because I feel like people always like skip steps in their journey. What is the typical journey to wine director? Like, if you start working as, are you like? I've heard of like dishwashers. I've heard server. Like, do you typically go that the sommelier and then work your way up? And then I feel like a lot of my friends in New York who were sommeliers, and it sounds like where you are too. A lot of it was like working in the cellar and keeping track and kind of like being kind of that cellar rat. I feel like that's kind of being lost some in some places these days without big cellars.
Yeah.
Can you talk?
Yeah, it's like so different than it was even before COVID. I think that like the our culture has just changed so much in terms of like patience and the understanding of the value of experience. But traditionally it would be like that you work your way up in the restaurant and then join the wine team or work with a sommelier who would train you, and then become from server to sommelier, and then to become a wine director at like a wine program like Frasca is really, you have to have a huge understanding of numbers, be great at, Excel, be great at relationships. Like, so much of my job is external communication. So I get, hundreds of emails a day from suppliers requesting appointments. You have to be great at managing time and be seriously responsive to people. You cannot be flaky. It's such a bad look for the company. You have to be great at managing your time outside of service, and understanding that it's a huge position, that it requires a lot more time than being a server. It's not just clocking in and clocking out. And I think that doesn't really appeal to that many people anymore. To me, I love it. I love everything about it. The financial side of managing like millions of dollars of inventory is a huge undertaking. And I think that that also doesn't appeal to that many people. Like, inventory sucks and it's not a fun process, but I take that responsibility to heart, and I like sorting through Excel spreadsheets, so that doesn't bother me. But and I like making the business money. I think that that's like a really rewarding process. But and then you also have to be a great educator. That's like so important. You have to be great at staff training. You have to be great at getting people excited about wine and teaching them how to communicate about wine. And so you kind of have to be like a school teacher also. So there's a lot that goes into it. And a lot of people post-COVID went from like assistant sommelier to wine director, like that, or bartender to wine director, and it's like kind of crazy. And you go to major markets like New York City, and almost everyone is a first-time wine director of like 2-3 Michelin star restaurants. It's nuts right now. It's super, because everyone that was experienced in restaurants after COVID, that they all left, and so they just left the industry. And so it's just a really weird moment right now in our industry, and in particular, like in wine departments. There's not a whole lot of experience.
Yeah, I didn't really think about the impact of COVID on that. Yeah, go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah, I was gonna say I know Bobby did a lot around COVID in terms of stuff with the industry, and so I imagine that your staff, there was a lot of resilience within your restaurant group. Is that right, or were you guys kind of affected by some of that as well? It seems like you're resilient there.
We were, we are super lucky to have the leadership we do, but we were, like every restaurant, seriously affected. We experienced major turnover. The restaurant industry just got demolished, and it still is like, the workforce today is totally different than it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And it's just a completely different experience managing individuals today than it was then. And, the expectations of staff are totally different. And so we have to be totally different. So it's just all about changing and adjusting and changing management styles. But retention is really hard, and no one wants to work in restaurants anymore. There's just this huge stigma against it, no matter what kind of company you are. Like, I believe that I know we're such a great company to work for. We have such great benefits, and I'm still in it. Like, I'm not a crazy person, and I like it. And it's really rewarding for so many people, and it provides a great lifestyle. And it's tough though. It's tough times for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that affect, and that's kind of hard to think through, but how does that affect the way that you look at your career over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, as you continue to grow in this role and, potentially another kind of role? I mean, wine director at Frasca has to be a sort of a dream job for you. So I don't know how you think through that, but how does it affect prospects at the very top level of the industry?
Like, what would I do next, or what?
Not well. Yeah, I don't want. No, I'm not looking for you to tell us, like, if you'd like to leave Frasca, because I assume that you're very happy. But just kind of your perspective on the folks that are seasoned, who have had legitimate like experience in at top groups in top positions. Are those people still there, or is there a high turnover rate as well for those who have been in the industry for 20 years?
I think people just got out of the industry and went and did
Mm-hmm.
kind of all different kinds of stuff, or went and worked at like for wine directors. I think there's a kind of transition to private client management,
Okay.
or auction house work and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, which I totally understand. For me, it's just not as compelling. I really love the people aspect. I love training people. I love also just interacting with the volume of producers that I get to, and the volume of guests that I get
Yeah.
to interact with. It's a serious relationship based business, and it's awesome. I like it. I like training sommeliers too, and seeing people's growth trajectory is really exciting to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I that appeals to me.
Well, I'm sure our listeners can tell just by the way that you've talked about your role and about the industry that you're obviously extremely sharp in terms of the way that you've honed your craft. And I just wanted to call out that you've been Food and Wine Magazine 2018 Sommelier of the Year. You're a Forbes 30 under 30, Wine Enthusiast 40 under 40. You've had a ton of success, have a dream role. What are, in terms of when you look at your skill set and you look at your career, what are you really focusing on right now that you say, I want to, dig deeper into this skill set or focus on this particular area of learning? What's your main focus right now, career wise?
Um, I think I can always be a better manager. I can always be a better leader. And so that is something I'm always working on. I'm always working on growing my team and investing in my team. I think that, to me, that's the best sign of success at this point, is not like growing myself so much as growing my sommelier
Mm-hmm.
team. I want them to reach their personal and professional goals, and so I want to spend my time helping them do that. Um, and just being as open and honest with feedback that I can for them. Yeah, and being in the way that Bobby has been so amazing to me, and grown me so much. I would like to do that for the 10 sommeliers that I manage.
That makes sense, especially as you described in this environment. That's kind of what's maybe missing at some other places. Um, One question I have, we don't normally ask folks this because it's really kind of hard, but what and I'm not going to say your favorite of all time, but what are some of the most memorable wines? I feel like you taste so many wines. What are some of your most memorable that like you just, and like I know this comes and goes, but what are some of the most memorable wines you've ever had, and like what blew you away? Was it the environment, the wine itself? What was it?
Gosh,
It doesn't have to be the top. Yeah, it could just be any random wines.
And
Everybody like has a problem picking the number one.
yeah.
gosh. Well, when in in 2014, I got the first the first time Daniel Jonas did this La Pole scholarship trip. I was on the first round of that, and so we went on the last night of the trip. We went to Tour d'Argent, in Paris, and we had there was like 6 of us, and there was a crazy budget for dinner for ordering wines. It was like 20,000 euros. And
Nice.
if you know the restaurant, it's the biggest cellar in Europe. And we did like a horizontal of wines made by Henri Jaillet. And so that was pretty incredible, all from the 90s. And like the table next to us was like, what's going on over there? And they started sending wine over. And that night I tasted, I think, like all the most epic wines I'd had at that point in my life. Had like 1973 Cristal Rosé, and so many things that were, I forget what vintage, maybe like 90 Chateau Rayas. Just so many incredible wines. But the Jaillet experience was definitely amazing. And incredible. I also love any chance I get to taste Arnaud Ant Marceau these days. It's like this elusive producer for me today. I can't get any, and I love it. So any Ant, it just gives me, it's like, to me, perfect white Burgundy. It has like this extreme reduction that I really, really love. And yeah, like every Ant that I've had recently has been lights out amazing. And Haut-Brion is also a wine that I love. And like early 90s Haut-Brion is an 85 Haut-Brion, an 82 Haut-Brion I've had a number of times, and it's just like, to me, the most compelling wine from Bordeaux. And Haut-Brion Blanc is also really cool and really special, and I love that wine also.
Nice. You really covered the gamut there. Those are some great.
Yeah. I know, I kind of went for it. Sorry.
Carlin's top 300 wines.
I know it's so hard to choose one because you're like,
Yeah.
had so many great moments with wine.
Yeah, this is what I was hoping for. I didn't want to limit you just to a couple, because then you end up getting nothing or just one. So yeah.
I always get excited when you have like a $40, $30 wine, and it just like completely resets your like conception of amazing wine. I had something like that recently. It was like a California Central Coast Grenache, and it just completely reset my mind in terms of how I thought quality and price point and like even just producers were kind of spread out on a continuum. Those are always cool experiences. It was the farm in West Side Paso, near York Mountain. And I don't know, they do like 85 cases of this Grenache. And it just like, I don't usually keep bottles of, $30 wine afterwards, but it's not $30. I think it's probably $60. But it was just completely I was like, I can't imagine how a wine could taste better. So those are always cool experiences.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Billy.
I was just going to say, I like how Carlin told us the stories about these amazing wines that were very far from $40. And you're like, yeah, I love it when I have $40 wines.
Yeah. I know. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when the Vint podcast blows up and we can go over and do that same horizontal, then we'll have similar answers.
Gosh, yeah, that will never happen to me again.
Yeah. Man, thanks so much for coming and chatting with us. I think that both you and Bobby, and it sounds like just based on the culture there, that everyone, your restaurant group really embodies. I think I'll speak for me, like how we would like the restaurant and like on-premise wine sales and like wine world within the restaurant industry look. It seems like you guys really embody that, and you're so sharp and you know so much about all these regions, and it's nice to see someone who takes that role so seriously and providing a really quality customer experience around wine. So really appreciate you coming and sharing with us about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And
yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch. Yeah,
thank you.
All right, that was our interview with Carlin Karr. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I love the old school wine director getting in the weeds, building a cellar from the ground up and maintaining it over time. It's really cool to see the old school Somm way of life still alive and kicking and really resulting in offering guests the best wine and experience possible. So I hope everybody enjoyed that. We'll be back with another exciting interview next week. Next week will be another author. Get ready for that. But until then, have a great rest of your week and goodbye. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circulars amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.